Figure it out.
Hello, this is Adam Koralik with Figured Out Productions. The following video is a video of some kind, and I hope you enjoy it. Hey everyone, welcome to the FigureItOutcast for January 2018. I'm your host, Adam Koralik, for the Adam Koralik channel, I guess. But anyway, yeah, hi guys, how are you doing? So today, what we're going to do, as per usual, we're going to talk about a whole host of different subjects that I've got written out here, some of which are by Patreon backers, and others, of course, are a lot of them are just ones I found interesting for one reason or another, and I thought we would discuss. Again, this podcast is primarily intended for Patreon backers. If you are a Patreon backer, you can get this the day it's recorded, which is right at the beginning of January. Obviously, this does eventually become public, so you don't have to actually be a Patreon backer. You can hear this on eventually. It's more out of date by that point. As always, I provide time code in the description, so you can skip around to subjects if there's one that interests you more than another, something like that. But yeah, let's just hang out and we will talk. So first of all, Happy New Year! I mean, which is, you know, obvious. Everybody's wishing everybody a Happy New Year. Hopefully you guys had a fun one, you had a safe one, and all that good stuff. I did a live show a little while back, and people, you know, right before New Year's, and everybody was asking me, like, what my resolution was and stuff like that, and I kept kind of joking about what that is. Traditionally, by accident, if you want to call it an accidental tradition, what I would do is every time I was live streaming, it meant I was going to fly somewhere the next day. And I kept joking, like, that's the resolution, is I want to get back to that, because I did like 4 live shows in December, and in no case was I flying anywhere the next day, which is weird. We got to get back to that. Because I travel a lot for, you know, work purposes. I get invited to a lot of conventions and events and stuff like that. So it's always just been kind of a coincidence. But with that in mind, I guess that's a half-baked resolution, but you know, it's basically my real resolution is just kind of keep doing what I'm doing, hopefully keep getting to work on YouTube and all that fun stuff, and make sure that the career continues. And it's so far so good, at least with January. I've already got multiple things I know I'm going to be doing. I'm going to New York very briefly, although by the time most of you hear this, all of these things will have happened. But if you're a Patreon backer, I'm about to go to New York. And then after that, I was invited to PAX South as a guest in San Antonio, Texas, so I'll be down there for a couple of days. And then right after that, I'm bouncing out to Germany for a thing, and then while I'm there, I'm going to swing my way over to Portugal, because that's where my girlfriend is, and I'm going to go see her. So yeah, that'll all be fun and exciting, hopefully. So hopefully, yeah, again, hopefully you guys tell me some of your New Year's resolutions. You know, what are you guys doing? And hopefully this year shapes up to be better than 2017. 2017 had a lot of minuses to it, let's just put it that way. But yeah, so let's move on with our first subject, which is not really a subject so much as a mere correction. A lot of people gave me shit for this, and you guys were completely right to do this. In December's episode of Playload, I was going through a bunch of the games I had picked up, and I got to Axiom Verge for the Switch, which I believe at the time, now that this video is, if you're watching this publicly, I believe that is now out for the Wii U in Europe. So, hey, who knows? Maybe I even picked it up while I was out in Germany and Portugal. Who knows? Although I think it might be like UK limited. Anyway, it doesn't matter. Axiom Verge. So when I was talking about it, I don't know what the hell I was talking about. You watched that video, I was very tired when I made it, and even you guys noticed that. And for some reason, when I was talking about Axiom Verge, I was just thinking about a completely different game. I was thinking about some sort of shoot 'em up, but I don't even know which one. So I described it as such. And then like later, you guys were like, dude, that's like a Castlevania Metroid game. And I was like, yeah, you're right. What the fuck was I talking about? So I want to apologize to everyone for that, because I don't know. I legit don't know what the hell I was talking about when I said that. I don't know what was going across my mind other than maybe I need more coffee. But yeah, so that was the situation there. So I just wanted to post a correction. I'm very aware of the situation. And thank you guys for bringing that to my attention. And I also appreciate, this is why in live shows, I always talk about how you guys are like really good viewers, because nobody was a dick about it. You guys were more like just confused. I don't really deal with too many dickheads, and I think that's pretty great. You guys are pretty awesome. So moving on from that, we're going to talk about a subject here. This is something I did mention in a live show back on my birthday, because I was saying I thought this was going to happen. I even thought it might happen that night. Now, it's kind of old news now, even at the time I record this, but I still wanted to talk about it because this is an all things nerd channel, basically. The subject is the concept that Fox was bought by Disney. Now, I'm sure a lot of you guys know that by now. If you watched me in December on the December 8th live show, my birthday show, I had mentioned during that stream that I thought it would happen, and I thought it would close at around $60 billion. It ended up closing at like 52.4, something like that. So I was pretty close. And it happened, it was officially announced just like a week later than that. Although it was, at the time, I thought it might even be announced that night. So that would have been crazy. But I'm sure you guys know that. So the reason I want to talk about this is not so much the specifics of the deal, because I want to talk more about the future of the MCU as a result of it. Now, MCU, of course, being the Marvel Cinematic Universe, where Captain America and Iron Man, all those guys who are in the same film universe, the Avengers universe, and what this means to them. Because the deal itself, it could be its own podcast. I mean, like, the child in me is very happy about all these Marvel characters being under one roof. The child in me is happy that Star Wars is all under one roof. Incidentally, A New Hope was still owned by Fox, or at least the distribution rights to it were owned by Fox. And I like that all these things are under one roof. The child in me likes that. The adult in me is kind of scared about the privatization of more media, but it is what it is. I have no power in that situation, so I might as well try to make the best of it. So one of the bests of it is to talk about the positives, and that is the child in me is talking about the positives. So let's specifically talk about the MCU. So a lot of you probably were aware, but if you weren't, Fox had the film rights to the Fantastic Four, and the X-Men, as well as Deadpool, who is technically qualified as one of the X-Men. So I just kind of want to give predictions as to what I think is going to happen as a result of all of that. First of all, Fantastic Four's situation is probably the weirdest one. Well, actually, no, they're all pretty weird. All three are pretty weird in different ways. So Fantastic Four, I think, will be the easiest for them to fold in because they don't have to care about the Jessica Alba movies. They don't have to care about Fan Four Stick. They're just ignoring all of that stuff, and that's very easy because audiences don't care about any of that. Actually, their situation is weird because I think Constantine Films still technically has some rights to Fantastic Four, so they could get in the way. But the way I understand it, Disney owns absolute distribution to anything with Fantastic Four on it, while Constantine Films has the right to actually make a movie. So if I'm Disney and Constantine Films gives me shit, Constantine Films has the right to go out and stop Disney from making a film, but they can't do anything with said film. So Constantine Films could go out and make their own Fantastic Four movie, and Disney couldn't actually prevent it. But at the same time, Disney could say, well, that's fine. You can make it. You can spend $100 million, make your movie, but you are not allowed to release it, which is technically within their power to do because Disney is the distributor. Now, there's been no indication that Constantine Films would attempt to interfere with Disney. They have no reason to. My guess is Constantine Films will either look for some sort of buyout as a whole, or that they'll just decide, we'll just play ball. Like, Constantine Films will just sign off on whatever Disney wants, and they'll just collect a check. My guess is how it plays, because it's not in Constantine Films' best interest to interfere. So I don't think that there's any real issues there. And that's good because, again, the Marvel child fan in me is just like, okay, cool. Fantastic Four has some really great villains. Galactus would be an amazing villain for a future, assembly movie after Infinity Wars storyline and all that stuff. And the Fantastic Four themselves, they can be done right. Disney is the only one who ever did a great Fantastic Four movie, and it was called The Incredibles. You could basically do something very similar. I'm sure Disney, I'm confident that Marvel Studios, Disney will handle that situation well, although they may not use the Fantastic Four themselves as much as they will the villains they're acquiring. So that's kind of how I see that playing out. Deadpool is a fascinating situation because Deadpool, I think, is, of all the previous films under the Fox banner, there was the Fantastic Four, which we just said none of those are going to matter. The X-Men movies, we'll talk more about it in the X-Men section, I guess, but none of those are going to matter either, long story short. But Deadpool is interesting because he's technically, that movie was part of the Fox X-Men universe of films, but there's nothing in it that absolutely keeps it there, other than the couple of cameos by some X-Men that we had not really seen in other X-Men movies. Granted, Colossus had been in other movies, but played by different actors. And then there was direct references to James McAvoy and Patrick Stewart, but those are like Deadpool in-jokes that you can get away with. What I'm arguing here is, I think of all those Fox movies, Deadpool is the only one that's going to be retroactively added to the MCU. I think that they'll just say, yeah, that movie was actually now part of the MCU. It fits into phase 3 or whatever somewhere, because Deadpool's allowed to be weird and break fourth walls. So they get away with one, especially because that movie was good and people really liked it, and obviously the sequel's right around the corner. I don't know if they're going to make any tweaks to the second one to make sure there's no additional contradictory things to the MCU. It's very possible that's going to be a thing. We don't know yet, but I think that's how that'll work. And it's also kind of funny because people always joked, that there was a helicarrier in Deadpool, like at the end for the big fight scene and all that stuff. Spoilers, I guess. But in Captain America Civil War, or not Civil War, sorry, Captain America 2, which I'm suddenly the Winter Soldier. In that film, that's helicarrier goes down and all that stuff, and people always said like, "Oh, wouldn't that be cool if that was the same helicarrier?" That's clearly what they intended as a gag, but now it can be canon, which is kind of interesting. So that's kind of funny. It's kind of that one is actually now, I guess, going to be canon, whereas there were little jokes before about other Marvel movies that had retroactively become canon without intention. One such example, if you watch, actually funny enough, you watch the first Captain America movie, I guess it's always Captain America comes back around and makes unintentional connections. You watch the first Captain America movie, there's a part where Red Skull, played by Hugo Weaving, he's holding like the gem, the Infinity Stone, and he starts talking about, and he's like, while the Fuhrer digs for things and the little trinkets in the desert, I have real power. He's making an Indiana Jones reference. He's making a reference to the Raiders of the Lost Ark. So the Lost Ark is specifically what he's talking about. So it was just a joke when they did it, but then Disney bought Lucasfilm and they bought the Indiana Jones rights along with that away from Paramount. Owned some of it. They got that, and then they got Lucas's connection to it. So they actually own the Indiana Jones stuff. So then one could argue, since all of those things are under the House of Mouse, since it's all under that, technically Indiana Jones could be part of the same Marvel Cinematic Universe. How screwed up is that? Just because of a single line, a single joke in that movie. Now, I'm not actually saying that one's real as an actual connection, but essentially it's just funny because this Deadpool stuff could be completely legitimate. I'm very curious to see, although we'll never, I guess, really know what changes they make to Deadpool 2, if any, to keep that. And to clarify, when I say changes, I don't mean like they're afraid of like making it too adult. It's got the Disney name on it. It can't be that adult. They're gonna keep it under the Fox name. They own that. But my guess is they make a couple of changes just to make sure it doesn't contradict stuff in the MCU, not content changes that they feel are offensive or anything like that. So I think that'll work out pretty well in Deadpool's favor. And then the last one, of course, is the X-Men. Now, I think I said this like a year ago, maybe even more than that, on some video or some live stream, some podcast, I don't know. But I know I've said this before. I always kind of felt like the X-Men not being part of the MCU was in some ways not a curse, but actually a benefit, which isn't. It's hard to make that argument to people because they don't like the idea that these characters were cut off from a universe like that. But I always thought it kind of helped because, and here's my argument. Now, I say this as someone who is not an avid comic book reader. There are people out there who know infinitely more about the Marvel universe of characters and how they get along and all that stuff, and they could probably make an argument that would be very convincing and perhaps would even sway me. But the filmmaker in me argues that the thing about the X-Men is that if the Marvel Cinematic Universe was real and the X-Men were in it, most beings on the planet that have any sort of special ability are therefore mutants, because the amount of mutants is insane. Like, granted, this is not canon anymore, but I believe the Fox movies even said it was, upwards to millions of people had that. But if you look at the Avengers as they're currently lined up, there's like 14 of them. So you couldn't have millions of Avengers. So, and that's fine. I get that. But I guess the argument I'm making is, in the current Marvel Cinematic Universe, Captain America, Black Panther, the Hulk, all these guys, they're special for one reason or another. Because they're kind of like Neo, they're the end result of a series of glitches that allowed them to be special for one reason or another. Captain America was the only super soldier before the program was destroyed. The Hulk was a failed super soldier experiment. All that kind of stuff. However, if the X-Men are a thing, that means that the vast majority of special entities are just mutants, and it's not even that uncommon, which makes Captain America even more useless. It means he's just a strong guy. Well, what do you need him for if you have the X-Men? That's kind of the case I was always making with that, and I think the only storyline, again, as a filmmaker, that is interesting to me with that understanding of the universe is that basically the only scenarios that those other characters are interesting, the only scenario where Spider-Man is interesting is if there's some sort of virus that, or something like that, some space virus that knocks out all of the mutants so they can't, cooperate or do anything. Then you just have a ragtag band of freaks who are not mutants that can do something. And that's not that can be a compelling story in of itself, but that's not great for universe building. So I don't know how Disney is going to handle that. If I had to guess, I would think they're going to scale down the amount of X-Men that exist and make the mutation be something that's much, much, much more rare than the Fox movies did. Now, I understand why the Fox movies did it, because they were kind of a revolving door of films that they had to produce constantly with changing actors and changing storylines, and that was the only cinematic characters they had. Mostly they had a few others, but they were not allowed to tie them together for legal reasons that don't apply anymore. But yeah, so I'm curious to see where all of this will go. I think this is, for Marvel fans, is a great thing. You're going to get more villains that you want to see. You're probably going to get more quality movies out of this as well. But the X-Men remain kind of an X factor. That seriously was not an intended pun. It just fucking came out. I'm sorry. It hit me as soon as I was mid-sentence that it was going to be a pun. I do apologize. But the thing is, though, so we talk about future releases. There was nothing in the works for Fantastic Four, so you don't have to worry about that. Deadpool 2, we just talked about. It'll still happen. It'll probably change small changes, but it'll be a thing. The X-Men movies are the most confusing ones for more reasons. They already had 3 films in production. In fact, I think they're all, with the exception of the first of the Dark Phoenix trilogy, they were all completed. So basically, my understanding is there was The New Mutants, which is still very much slated to come out. The movie is completely in the can. It would be illogical to stop. There was a second one, although I don't remember what it was offhand. I apologize for that. But that one will exist. Maybe that was Deadpool 2, now that I think about it, because I think Deadpool 2 was considered an X-Men movie. But either way, that second one will come out. And then there's the first of the Dark Phoenix trilogy. That one apparently finished filming, but is still in post-production, and Disney's kind of in the situation where they don't really know what to do with it, because they obviously have no intention of completing that trilogy or even getting to a second one. And if they stop production and just end that film, then the less time they have to wait to use those characters for themselves in their own universe. Because if they put out an X-Men Dark Phoenix movie, then people are wondering, well, all right, where's the next one in that storyline? And then, I don't know, I see a lot of negatives to releasing it. The only positive is you already spent the money to produce the film, and you just spent $52.4 billion to buy Fox. Releasing that movie will slightly recoup some costs, but that's about it. And plus, people will just wonder, like, whatever happened to that, like, lost X-Men movie. So I don't know. We'll see how that plays out. If I'm Disney, I'm seriously considering not releasing that movie if Kevin Feige, who is running the MCU, comes to me with a compelling enough package to explain why it would be bad to release that film. And here's how we can sooner roll things into the MCU if you don't release this movie. The other thing that I heard was that the Gambit movie is still in some phase of production. And technically, Disney doesn't actually have the control over Fox yet. So if the people over there who want to get Gambit made really rush it, they could get that movie into production. Because as soon as the House of Mouse completely takes over, that movie will definitely get canceled. So it's very interesting. Very interesting to see how all that stuff will play out. But anyway, enough for that subject. Let's move on. More, movie stuff. More, again, we're talking Disney still, technically. The Han Solo movie. The Star Wars movie that no one asked for and no one wanted is around the corner. That movie comes out in May of this year, 2018. And there's been some news about this lately. There was some promo art that like leaked out, stuff that we really weren't meant to see, not like the official poster or anything like that. And I've been reading some reports that, claim from inside information, which take that as a grain of salt, that Disney is fully prepared to accept that this movie will likely bomb. Additional market research, I guess, indicates that a lot of people, such as myself, a lot of other Star Wars fans, like I watch a lot of people who are excited about Star Wars, and I am yet to hear even one person say like, I can't wait to see this movie. It seems like something someone greenlit, but nobody seems to know why. Because everything I've heard, the driving force that got Solo made was Lawrence Kasdan wrote it. Lawrence Kasdan wrote Empire Strikes Back, and so he had clout over there. He also wrote Force Awakens. And he wanted to get this made. The supposed reason is that his son hasn't done as well in Hollywood as he has, and he's been trying to get him some more work. So having him be somewhat responsible for this movie, if it was successful, would be a good credit to the son of Lawrence Kasdan. That's my understanding of the situation as to why this movie's getting made. I don't like that because, again, this is a movie that I don't think anybody really wanted. I know I'm definitely not excited or interested in it. It's part of what made Han Solo great was not really understanding him as well. Like, knowing he's a rogue and all that stuff is good, but I don't really need to see his origin of how he became like that. I don't need to see a movie where he, does the Kessel Run in less than 12 parsecs. I don't need that movie. So we'll see. And if you haven't been following that movie, the production of it has been an absolute nightmare. They hired Lord and Miller, which are the guys who did the Lego movie, to make it originally. Then Disney, or maybe it was Kathleen Kennedy specifically, Kathleen Kennedy is the head of Lucasfilm, deemed their film essentially unwatchable. And they brought in Ron Howard to reshoot I think he reshot something like 95% of the film. And that's what we're going to end up getting is the rushed Ron Howard version. This movie is in such, I guess you could argue, shambles at this point, that it's kind of strange that the movie didn't have a trailer before Last Jedi, but it wasn't ready. So I don't see how this movie ends up being anything other than a complete disaster in the Star Wars universe. And the only plus to it, in my opinion, is they were at least smart enough to keep it in the May release date as opposed to pushing it to December of 2018. Just because if it bombs in May of 2018, everyone will have had their Star Wars fix from Last Jedi not too long before that, and it'll give us enough time to kind of forget about that movie and give us a year and a half off before we get to Episode 9. But really, this is kind of like the first of the Dark Phoenix trilogy. Like, Disney, maybe just don't release this one. I don't know. I mean, I obviously haven't seen it, but it just kind of comes off like a movie that really didn't need to exist. And a lot of people behind the scenes, from what I've read, are saying like, this is not a very good movie. It's probably not going to turn out very well. And Disney might be expecting this thing to tank. So we will see, but it wouldn't surprise me if it did, because like I said, I love Star Wars. This is not a movie I ever wanted to see, and anybody I've talked to about it doesn't really seem to care about its existence, and that's to say the least unfortunate. And what bothers me the most about it is I'm not opposed to this concept of, I actually like the idea that you give individual films to certain characters or to certain storylines that are away from all the Skywalker stuff. I like that. Though I guess technically Han was a Skywalker by marriage later down the line, but whatever. But Han Solo was never even close to the right character for this. Not only because it takes away the mysticism of him, but also it's really hard to imagine anyone other than Harrison Ford in that role. And they weren't going to CGI his face throughout an entire film. They couldn't Grand Moff Tarkin him for an entire feature. I don't know. Maybe if you'd done this movie animated or something like that, it might have worked. I don't know. I don't see this playing out well. So I would have liked if you're going to do one of these, like, single character biopic type of movies, Obi-Wan Kenobi. He was the perfect choice. Ewan McGregor is still around. He is the right age for it. He's expressed interest, and apparently they are kind of moving forward with that, though I wouldn't be surprised if that gets canceled because of the Solo movie. I would have loved to have seen that one. People have been throwing around Boba Fett, and I was like, I don't really care about a Boba Fett movie. Boba Fett is Captain Phasma of the original trilogy. Built up a lot by fans, but really does nothing. But even Boba Fett did more than Phasma, admittedly. But still, not a movie I care much about. The other one that would have worked really well is a Darth Vader film, because James Earl Jones is still with us. And even if he couldn't do it, my buddy Matt Sloan, who voices Darth Vader for the video games and stuff like that, he'd obviously do the film. But Darth Vader has a very interesting story between the time of Revenge of the Sith and A New Hope, or I guess Rogue One now. And even after that, he has a lot of interesting stuff that happens to him after A New Hope, but before Empire Strikes Back. I mean, if you read that Darth Vader comic that's going around, that shows it. Like, most of the time between Revenge of the Sith and A New Hope is mostly just Vader hunting down Jedi across the galaxy and just defeating them one by one by one. And then after A New Hope, his whole thing is basically assuming responsibility for the destruction of the Death Star and being like adamant on finding whoever that rebel was that blew it up, and then eventually learning that that rebel is Luke Skywalker, which is his offspring, which he did not know existed, and then having to learn a lot about, like, did the Emperor lie to me, and creating distrust between the two, which is why in Empire he's all like, you know, join me, we can kill the Emperor, you know, all that stuff. Because up until then, he never questioned the Emperor's motives or anything, because Anakin was kind of dumb. But that's a more interesting storyline with a much more recreatable character. It's a dude in a suit. And then you still have the voice actor on board. So I don't know. I think that would have been infinitely better than the Solo movie. So, you know, I don't know, man. I'm not excited about the Solo movie. What can I say? But we'll move on from that for now. We'll talk more about it when I've seen it. Again, I'm willing to see it. I'm going to see it, and I'll judge it accordingly. When I see it, I might come out and be like, that was the greatest Star Wars movie I ever saw. I don't know what the hell I was thinking, you know, 6 months ago, 5 months ago, whatever. But for now, I gotta say, really not excited about it. But different Star Wars news, well, not news, you guys have all seen it. But Star Wars, The Last Jedi, hopefully you all saw it. If not, skip around to the next thing, I guess. But I did an entire video on this after the movie. I waited a day, and then I did a live stream talking about it. And I gave my initial impressions. Now, much like a lot of people, I went and I saw it a second time. And the second time, I have to say, is that there is truth to the whole thing about this movie being better the second time around. Because you're not as shocked by things, and you kind of know where things are going, and you have time to digest other stuff, and it works a lot better. So specifically what I wanted to talk about with this right now is just kind of a follow-up, is just to discuss, was this movie a mistake or not? Now, to clarify, this movie made a shit ton of money for Disney, so I'm sure they're not upset about it. But I do know a lot of the hardcore fan base is not pleased with this film, and as a result, a lot of them are not going back to see it as much. Granted, this movie at the time, even now that I record this at the beginning of January, and by the end of January, I'm sure it'll be much higher, but even at the beginning of the January, it's already grossed over $1 billion worldwide. So Disney is not unhappy with the financial performance of this film. But what will this mean going, forward? How much will this affect the Solo movie? Because I know a lot of people are very burned out on Star Wars right now, and going into the Solo movie, which is one that nobody even wanted to begin with, I get the feeling the Solo is going to get really hurt by that. But this movie, one of the things that really bothered me about it was it, and Rian Johnson confirmed it himself. Rian Johnson was the writer and director of Last Jedi. He confirmed in a tweet that there was no plan from Lucasfilm. Kathleen Kennedy, who runs Lucasfilm, did not have any sort of vision. She did not have a Kevin Feige-like system where she had this idea of where she wanted Star Wars to go. She just kind of does things on a one movie at a time basis. And that's an old Hollywood type of producer model. I mean, she's good at that. Kathleen Kennedy is one of the best producers in Hollywood history. Like, a lot of the greatest movies you love, she's attached to in some way. I don't knock her for that. But she's not necessarily the best architect of a universe. But the thing is, she's there because she was part of the condition of the sale of Lucasfilm to Disney. So a lot of people are saying, like, should she resign? Should she be fired? She's not going to be fired. I mean, she's made 3 movies under her tutelage, 3 movies, and all 3 have grossed over $1 billion. Disney is not unhappy with her financially. Solo probably won't be able to do that, but I do really wish that she had more of a vision, because the point I was trying to make there is Rian Johnson essentially confirmed for all of us that Disney does not have a vision for Star Wars. When he went into The Last Jedi, people ask, like, how much of the storylines from Force Awakens, what did you follow? What were the rules? And he basically said nothing. I watched the movie and then I just decided what I wanted to do, which blew me away. I was like, really? There was nothing. So the whole JJ mystery box, like JJ Abrams is notorious for what's called the mystery box, where you create a movie or create a storyline. This is how he did it with Lost too. You create a storyline where you just ask a ton of questions to get the audience intrigued, and so they keep wondering, like, what does this all mean? Where's it all going? All that stuff. But in true JJ fashion, there's absolutely no payoff because there's no plan. You're just asking a bunch of questions and seeing where it goes. So there was no plan going to Last Jedi, which is why certain plot lines were entirely dropped, like the Knights of Ren. And then there was other things where, Rian Johnson didn't really like something, like didn't like Snoke, or he didn't like, the whole mystery behind Rey's parents, that kind of thing. And so addresses it in his own way. I really hate that because that makes me go, I don't know how much I care about episode 9. Like, I'll see it again. It's Star Wars. I'm going to see it. But without knowing there's some sort of plan, you're trying to go somewhere with this, I don't know, man, it's inherently less interesting. The original trilogy had an architect in the form of George Lucas and Gary Kurtz. Now, that Gary Kurtz never gets enough credit for the original trilogy, and he really should. Especially for Return of the Jedi. George really took over on Return of the Jedi and kind of... Go research that story. It's very interesting how much he kind of kicked Gary Kurtz out of Return of the Jedi. But there was a plan. They were going somewhere with it. Even if you hate the prequels, man, it's indisputable that George was going somewhere with it. They're not going anywhere with this trilogy. They're not going anywhere with Star Wars in general. They're just kind of telling you a story at the time. And that bothers me. That just bothers me. So the question I proposed to you was it a mistake to do it that way? Without knowing the end of the trilogy, I guess it's hard to say, but it just took a lot of the magic out of it to me. If you're just saying, like, we just made a movie and we'll just see what the hell happens next. I don't like that. So I don't know. But enough on that. Let's go to our next subject here. This next subject is brought to us by a Patreon backer who you guys, I'm sure, are very familiar with if you listen to this podcast a lot. Corey Marsh. Corey Marsh wanted me to talk about God of War, or God of War 4 as it's sometimes dubbed, and specifically, like, a little bit of the backstory of this game, my opinions on it so far, if I'm excited, all that fun stuff. So God of War, as it is technically called, is often referred to as God of War 4 because it's supposed to be a continuation from God of War 3, but it's also technically the 8th game. So there's some, I guess, confusion about this game, which is a lot of people think it's a remake or a reboot. It's not. It's actually a soft reboot where it's kind of like funny enough, it's kind of like what Force Awakens was to the previous Star Wars movies. Like, it's canon, it's what happens next. It's just awfully similar in some respects to part of the previous thing you're already aware of. So in this case, they've decided to kind of rebrand it as just God of War, like they're starting over, but not really. Your previous Kratos adventures still happened, and he's still around, and that's still him, and it's the further continuation of his journey. But the game will have massive mechanics changes, including not just gameplay changes, but camera changes, all that kind of stuff. And having looked at it a lot, I think it looks really fun, and it definitely shows off the additional capabilities of the PS4 Pro, because I guarantee you, like, every clip, every trailer, everything of that game was run off of a PS4 Pro under like optimum settings just to try and make it look as good as it can. And it does quite look good, and I'll definitely give it credit for that. And I think it's definitely, I know it's going to come out relatively soon, and I think that it's going to be very symbolic of what I've been saying about Sony for 2018, the PlayStation launch anyway, or lineup. I think that PlayStation 4 gamers are going to have a very fun year, and I think this is one of the games that will definitely help with that. Now, unfortunately for me, I haven't played one of the God of War games in a long time, so I don't have like a holy shit, I can't wait to get my hands on this type of vibe for God of War, but it is definitely going to be on my list of things to get, and I'm going to try my best to kind of catch myself up and play those. I really want to do that because I haven't played one in a long time, but this game definitely looks pretty awesome. Hopefully, at the very least, I can do a live stream of it on my other channel on Game Society. So yeah, looking forward to it, and I hope that kind of clears up some of the confusion if you didn't know that. It is not, I repeat, not a remake. Your previous games are still there. It's the 8th technically in the storyline, and it should be a lot of fun. So there you go. So thank you very much, Corey. And moving on, we're going to do a round of shout outs here. This is other people I want to thank. Now, all of these people are Patreon backers who are at the appropriate tier in which they get a shout out. So basically just let's just do a quick round of shout outs. And we have a new one in here too, which is exciting. First of all, we got Justin Webb, and we have, this is the new one. We have Jonas Pachonka. I apologize. I don't know how to pronounce that. I apologize if I got it wrong, but hopefully you got a good laugh out of it. Rob Janos, Trey Wagner, who incidentally, he and I went to go see Last Jedi. That was when I saw it the second time. And finally, Tim Inman. So thank you once again to Justin Webb, Jonas Pachonka. God, I suck. I'm sorry. Rob Janos, Trey Wagner, and Tim Inman. All of you are awesome. Thank you very much for helping to keep not only the podcast going, but to keep the channel going and everything. I really appreciate it. Hashtag fuck apocalypse. Yes, I just said hashtag out loud. Sorry. But anyway, thank you to all of you guys. And thank you to everyone who also is a Patreon backer who's just doing the early access thing or just any level of support. Or even if you're not doing that, if you're just watching this on YouTube after it's up for free, I appreciate that too. I really appreciate all the support that every single one of you give me. So thank you. So moving on, let's continuing with more video game discussion. I got a few different subjects here about the Switch. Now, I'm going to give full credit to at least this first one from Kyle Vaughn. Now, Kyle Vaughn is another Patreon backer who every month gets to pick a subject. Although I talked to him the other day, he's going to be taking a little bit of a break, but he says he will be back. But so for the last subject for him for a while anyway, he said he didn't really care what the subject is, so I just thought this would be kind of interesting. Now, there was a new peripheral released for the Switch in Japan that just perplexed me when I saw it. I've never seen it in person. I just saw it online. There's now a neck mount for the Switch. It's kind of like this. I'll show a picture of it in the video here. It's like a cradle that you wear over your neck, and your body holds the Switch up. So you can just walk around with it. Kind of like some sort of weird neck brace, but its function is just to keep the Switch in a playable position on your body like that. And I don't know, man, that just caught my attention because I was like, that's weird. It's definitely not for the bashful, like that would be a really weird thing to walk around with and play. I mean, I'm not judging. It also seems like something that'd be more useful in your house, but if you're in your house, why wouldn't you just use the mount or whatever, use the dock and play it on a TV? I don't know. Or just put the screen on a table. I don't know. But it seems like an oddly niche peripheral, but the fact that it exists, man, is just weird. And I know Kyle really appreciates weird peripherals and games and consoles and things like that, so I thought that he would enjoy that. So hopefully you did. Hopefully I was right, and thank you very much, Kyle, for the support. So moving on to our next subject, we have more Switch discussions, and this is just something I was thinking about the other day. Switch physical editions, are they half-baked? Are they getting out of control? Let's discuss. Now, if you guys follow me, and you must because you're listening to this, I'm very much a pro physical media gamer. I do not like digital content, so I don't support digital stuff. So the Switch has been nice to me because not only is it kind of a cartridge throwback, even though not really cartridges, they also get a lot of physical editions of stuff that generally otherwise would not. But the problem with it is this kind of a ghost of the N64, in that the cartridge, again, I'm using that term, but it's not technically accurate, has a very limited amount of storage. In the case of the Switch, I believe it's 32 gigabytes per cart. Now, Nintendo is capable of making bigger ones, much like they were capable of making N64 games that were bigger. I believe the standard N64 cartridge was like 8 megabytes, but you were technically capable of making one up to 128 megabytes, which I believe actually had Resident Evil 2. Funny enough, it was a Resident Evil game on the Switch that kind of proved this problem. So the Resident Evil Revelations collection came out, and I actually discussed it on the previous playload, the same one where I fucked up about Axiom Verge. When that came out, there was not enough space on the cart to host both games. So what they decided to do was just put out the first game on the cart and then include a digital code to the second one, which I find annoying. Now, apparently, I forget the examples, but some people were messaging me and saying, like, this game's coming up, and then here's the same problem. I think it was LA Noire is one of them, where, like, half of the game is on the cart. NBA 2K18 is kind of like that. I guess those are both 2K, so I guess it's... No, sorry. LA Noire is Rockstar. Point is, a lot of third-party developers, especially Western ones, are kind of screwing that up, and they're not able to fit their games onto 32 gigabyte carts. There's two possible solutions to this. but they're going with the third. The first solution is better compression methods. Nintendo themselves doesn't really run into this problem because apparently they understand their own hardware better, which makes sense. It's theirs. Whereas a lot of third-party developers aren't taking the time to try and compress their games down. They're just kind of like, yeah, that's hard, and the game was designed for bigger consoles, so we're not going to do all that work, especially when they're not that confident in the platform, though that one might change now that the platform is more successful. The other solution would be something that I really don't think they're going to do, which is to release bigger carts. And I don't mean physically bigger, I mean ones that host more memory. Much like I said, N64 carts could do that. They just became exceedingly expensive for production when they did that. And as it is, we have what's called the Switch tax, where Switch games are already more expensive than the PS4 or Xbox One versions in a lot of cases, just because it uses more materials and it uses physical memory as opposed to a plastic disc. And to double the size of storage at a minimum in there would only, increase the cost of the unit to produce, which they couldn't necessarily justify on a box label to explain why you're paying another $10. So they would just lose a lot of money on it, and I don't think they want to do that. So they're probably going to keep them to the 32 gigabytes unless they absolutely have to increase it, or if simply the next wave, like 64 gigabyte cards, end up just becoming cheap enough to justify. But that's a different issue. Instead, what they're doing is neither of those solutions. They're just providing digital downloads, as is the case with Resident Evil Revelations, or in the case of something like LA Noire and NBA 2K18, they're saying, okay, we fit as much as we could on here, and now we're just going to have you download the rest onto an SD card, which is annoying because it's not future-proofing things, and I really don't like that. That's what I mean when I say they kind of half-baked, and are they kind of getting out of control because you're kind of not getting enough quality releases as far as the amount of content. Now, one could sit there and argue, hello, the Xbox One and the PS4 already do this. Yes, and you'd be totally right to say that. But I guess we hold Nintendo to a higher standard for some reason that I'm not entirely certain what it is. But even I feel it. I feel like Nintendo should try harder. I don't know. It's a low bar of expectations, but I don't know. I just kind of wish they would. And the other thing with the Switch is, I was kind of wondering, do you guys think maybe physical editions on the Switch are getting a tad out of control as far as the amount? What I mean by that is, and this is not a bad thing, but I'm just thinking down the line here. Nintendo has decided to play ball with indie developers, which I'm happy about because there's a lot of great indie games I'd love to see on the Switch and I'd love to get physical editions of and all that stuff. But this is kind of the collector's curse of a successful console. If that happens, then you get a ton of games released in limited amounts only in certain countries. Like right now, I think Germany has something like 3 games exclusively for the Switch, and it seems like it's going to get even higher. And now companies like Limited Run Games and other companies, I believe it was V-Blank, who did Retro City Rampage, they got a physical edition of that in very limited quantities. Limited Run Games is going to start doing the Switch as well. And it's just kind of like, what do you do as a collector? Because I'm a collector and a gamer, but I like to collect stuff. But there's a point where it's not fun anymore. And in that instance, it kind of stops being fun. Because if you have to sit there and always be aware of like, okay, I have to be around at exactly this time to buy like this, 1,000 limited copy of a game that, I don't know, it's not, when that's like a regular thing, it's not really as enjoyable anymore. Because if you ever miss it, then you essentially have fucked your collection, provided you were trying to get all of them. And I don't know, that to me is not fun. I mean, I'm glad these games are getting released and they'll exist, don't get me wrong, but there's that collector part of me that kind of like, oh fuck, okay, I don't know. What are your stance on that? I'm just curious what everyone out there thinks about that. And if you're the kind of gamer who doesn't care about that kind of thing, you're just like, I just want the games, then believe me, I get it. That's, in some ways I'm jealous because that's much easier. But I don't know. That's just my stance on the issue. And now another subject on the Switch that is our last subject on the Switch for now. So I was just thinking about this the other day, and then I realized there was an update that was kind of silent. So the Switch is primarily a gaming platform. Duh. It has not really focused much on additional apps and things like that and other capabilities. Like, it can't read like DVDs or Blu-rays or music CDs. It doesn't even have a disc drive. That makes sense. So we also live in 2018 now. So you would expect more like in the way of digital apps for streaming services. But to be honest, there really aren't any, with some very small exceptions. So the question I propose to you is, where are those apps and do we even care? So for example, back in July of 2017, Japan kind of silently released an app for the Switch called Nico Nico. Now, I don't know much about this service, but I know it is some sort of Japanese video streaming service. So that exists. It's been there for a little while. And then back in November of 2017, very silently, I mean, it wasn't even until I thought of this question and I started looking it up I didn't even know this happened. But back in November of 2017, Nintendo very silently released a Hulu app for the Switch. Now that tells me that Netflix and YouTube are right around the corner. And that's good because I'm very pro options with that kind of thing. But then, there's that other part of me that goes, well, it's a gaming console. Shouldn't I care more about just it only focusing on games? That's always the divide with stuff like this is, you think, oh, I want the dedicated gaming console, but then you get kind of annoyed when it doesn't do additional things. So I guess what I'm asking you guys is, what's your stance on it? My stance on it is essentially, I don't think Netflix developing their own app in any way hinders Nintendo's ability to make a game. So it's just kind of a bonus feature, and I like it on that basis. Now, granted, it doesn't, at the time I record this anyway, Netflix does still not exist on the Switch. But I think in the Switch's case, it would be a lot more useful because of its portability. I don't know if I would ever use it in docked mode, because then I would just use like the Xbox or whatever. But the idea that I could use it portably is admittedly very nice. But then again, I also have my phone for that purpose. But potentially, because it's a bigger screen, that could be good. I don't know. I'm just curious what you guys think about that, and what other apps, assuming that those continue to be a thing, what else would you want to see? Now, we might eventually get whatever that Disney app is. If you guys aren't aware, that's the real reason that Disney bought Fox. It wasn't for the Marvel characters. It wasn't for Star Wars. It was because they wanted their library for a digital streaming service that Disney intends to create to compete with Netflix. So they'll have all of Disney content and all of Fox content under one roof. The characters and all that stuff was just kind of a bonus, as weird as that might sound. So I'm thinking that'll eventually get on there, but that could be years away. Who knows? But yeah, just some food for thought. Just curious what you guys think about that. And has anybody actually tried the Hulu app or the Nico Nico app? I'm assuming you're in Japan. I'm just curious how they actually work. I would assume they work fine, but I'm curious. Next subject here. This was an interesting article I read, and I just kind of wanted to comment on it because it kind of led me to think something. So there's this store in New York City that I have actually been to before called Video Games New York, and you might hear a little bit about them out of my mouth in the next couple of months, but I'll save the reason for that till later. But there's a store there who got featured in an article that I read. And what they were talking about, and apparently there's a few other stores that seem to agree with this, the hottest selling retro console over the holidays was the Nintendo 64. Which doesn't really surprise me. The N64 is at exactly the right age where the generation that had it as kids want it now as adults. It's also a system that is fondly remembered by those who had it, even though it actually only had like a handful of games that were really, really good, and it had a lot of inferior ports of other things. I mean, don't get me wrong, I like the N64, but I like it for the same reason you like it, which is like the same 10 games. But it sold very well. And so the question I propose is it time for Nintendo to do an N64 Classic? And if so, what do you include in it? Now, personally, I've never supported one of those like NES or SNES Classics. I don't care about them. And I wouldn't care about an N64 Classic. But what I do like the idea of is that these classic editions of these things come out, and then they kind of get to that market of people who have the nostalgia thing without basically using their money to take out of the retro scene. So what I mean by that is, if Guy walks in a store and wants NES collection, he has two choices. He can get the NES Classic Edition, which is probably easier and more convenient, whatever. He can get that, or he can go there and buy up NES games that I might have wanted to get. If the NES Classic Edition exists, then I don't have to worry about that guy. And so, as someone who, kind of likes to collect stuff, as mentioned before, I've never had a goal of getting like a full N64 set, but I know it would be easier and drive the market down if there was less competition. So if an N64 Mini existed, that works in my favor, even if I never own it. Now, the problem with an N64 Mini is N64 emulation is still not exactly perfected. Now, don't dispute for a second that Nintendo could do it. It's their platform. They have that capability. But it may be further away than we'd like, which is unfortunate. I was kind of thinking they might, if they do one this year, it would probably be the Game Boy Classic. But maybe if this is any indicator, they need to jump while they can. And if the N64 Classic did happen, you would then have a definite gap because there's no way they're ready to do a GameCube Classic in a year. So I don't know. And I can tell you right now, if an N64 Classic happens, there's one game I absolutely guarantee will pop up in there, which is Sin and Punishment, which was a Japanese game for the N64 made by Treasure, and it's really good. I actually own the physical card of it. I bought it in Japan. It's a fun game, and they even translated it at one point, and they sold it digitally on the Wii eShop, or the Wii Shop, no, the Wii, I don't know, WiiWare thing. The Wii channel bullshit. As you can tell, I don't play much with digital games. And then ultimately they remade the game and released it on the Wii. But I will bet you that if they do an N64 Classic, they will include the English translated N64 version on that, because I think they learned from the SNES Classic that one of the big reasons people bought that was how you got the official release of Star Fox 2, if you want to call it that. The final dump of that game is officially consented to by Nintendo, and I think it would be kind of a similar situation. Granted, Star Fox 2 never came out in any region, whereas Sin and Punishment did, but Sin and Punishment, like I said, I've played it. That is a game that definitely should have come out, and it's kind of amazing that it never did, at least not in a physical N64 North American release or European release, but it really should have. So I'll bet you that gets thrown in there along with the ones you actually remember. But somebody pointed this out to me the other day, and I thought that is a really interesting point about the N64 Classic. A bunch of the games you would expect to be on there would not be, because Rare made a bunch of them. Like the Banjo-Kazooie games wouldn't be on there. Conker's Bad Fur Day wouldn't be on there. Perfect Dark would not be on there. Donkey Kong 64 probably still would be, because Nintendo owns that, even though Rare developed it. But I think that would be an interesting situation where if Nintendo wanted to do it properly, they would have to go to Microsoft and basically cut a deal. And the only deal I could see them cutting is one where Nintendo basically gave up their claim to GoldenEye. If you're unfamiliar, the situation with GoldenEye is that it's owned basically by 3 different people at the same time, or at least a third of it. Rare owns like the assets for having made it. Nintendo owns some license for having helped to create it, and then now, because it's a James Bond game, I believe EA actually owns the actual like James Bond entity as for gaming purposes. So Nintendo's the real holdout there, because Nintendo doesn't really cooperate with anybody. If Nintendo were to cut this deal with Microsoft, and I'm making this deal up, this does not exist. As far as I know, nobody's ever even talked about this officially at either company. But I'm just working this out in my head. I think that if Nintendo went to Microsoft and said, like, you let us use some of these games that already exist and put on our N64 Classic thing, we will give up our rights to GoldenEye. Then Microsoft would essentially own 2/3 of it. And Microsoft has a very functional working relationship with EA, so it really wouldn't surprise me if they were able to finalize that and get some sort of HD remake or remaster or whatever the hell of GoldenEye for those who want it. That would be, if I worked at one of these companies, the deal I'd be attempting to cut. But knowing Nintendo, they probably will just not do anything. They'll just release their own games, and that'll be that. But that's my guess. So I guess that's kind of it for that subject. Maybe you could list some games you'd want to see in there. Keep in mind that they're going to be Nintendo entities. Your Star Fox will be in there, but like random games that they don't own anymore, not going to be on that list. Blast Corp, not going to be on that list. Resident Evil 2, not going to be on that list, probably, unless Capcom plays ball. But I don't know. You never know. Some of those companies actually do kind of cooperate, but I don't think Rare and Microsoft would be one of them. But anyway, we'll move on here to our absolute last subject, which is just a small thing. I just kind of want to talk about upcoming videos. So at the time I record this podcast, I already have a few that are finished because I'm going to be gone for a good chunk of January. However, by the time you hear this, they will have already come out. I got a lot of stuff in the pipeline there. I was kind of making up my schedule for the next couple of months. Some stuff I obviously know, and there's obviously gaps I will not know until later down that get filled in one way or another. But here's the spoiler, I guess. There's a lot of Dreamcast content coming. It's going to get very nostalgic, like the early Keep Dreaming days where I was just pumping those things out. It's going to be a lot like that because, damn, There's a lot of Dreamcast content coming, and I'm very happy about that, and I hope you guys will enjoy it too. But I guess I'll kind of leave it with that for now. You're also going to get the normal, there's going to be the podcast like this, obviously. There's also going to be the monthly playload episode, and I'm going to try and stick to just one live stream a month. If you guys missed it, December I did 4 of them, and I even set my new record. The last live stream of the year was December 30th. I went for 7 hours. 7 hours. And people tell me, because there are people who actually go back and watch those things, they tell me like I was just gone by that last hour. I was like ridiculously goofy, which I don't doubt. It was 7 hours in front of a mic. But that's what happens. So I'm going to try and limit it to just one, but who knows? I might decide to do more. Anyway, guys, that's it for now. Thank you very much for watching. I want to thank all the Patreon backers. I want to thank Kyle, Justin, Jonas, Rob, Trey, Tim, as well as Corey, and everybody who supports the podcast and anybody who just listens to it. I really appreciate it. Thank you very much for watching. I'll see you all later.